Waterworks Part 2, The Water Life Cycle, Cleaning Wastewater for the Future is a community partner content project in partnership with the Clean Water Project and the Metropolitan District.
This program is a community partner content production. The Metropolitan District Commission was involved in the development of this documentary. All final artistic and editorial decisions were made by CPPN.
Think about how much water we use every day. Our household chores, our daily hygiene, our lawns and gardens. The fact is, we each use more than 100 gallons of water a day. Not to mention the huge amounts of water used by farms and businesses. Once we're done with it, the water seemingly just disappears. But here's the thing, it doesn't disappear. It becomes waste, and it needs to be treated. But our system for treating it in Connecticut isn't working. One region is even under state and federal mandates to correct the problem.
Untreated human waste, untreated industrial chemicals and wastewater entering the water.
Overflows of potentially raw sewage or partially treated sewage.
Sanitary sewers can back up into the basements of people's houses.
You have waterborne diseases that are created and not a very happy population or a healthy population.
There's a problem and it needs to be fixed.
But a solution is in the works. A massive initiative that will cost more than $2 billion called the Clean Water Project. It's all being done by Hartford's MDC, the Metropolitan District.
The MDC's Clean Water Project is really a dramatic and massive undertaking to really address a legacy that we have of older storm sewers and sewage sewers that are built in our older cities.
We're doing the largest public works project any municipality's ever done in the state of Connecticut.
It will take a lot of time, a lot of digging and building,
I will do that.
negotiating and educating.
Item 11, Bureau of Public Works, consideration regarding encroachment agreement. Is there a motion?
Its efforts will have far-reaching effects for both our health and our environment. Imagine life without sewers. Dumping dirty water outdoors in streets, dangerously close to drinking water supplies. That's how it was in the 1800s.
Sewage and other raw contaminants were just literally running down the sides of the streets, causing public health implications.
Like many other cities, Hartford officials saw fit to build a system to carry that waste away. The city's first public sewer was begun in 1843 at a cost of $840. That's about $30,000 today. The system grew in the 1850s, shortly before the Civil War, to serve about 30,000 people.
It was considered state of the art. This was a massive step forward.
Controlling sewage drastically reduced the incidence of waterborne diseases such as typhoid and cholera. But Hartford's, like most early sewage systems, discharged directly into area waterways without any treatment.
Imagine yourself as an engineer at the time. What you're going to want to do is put all that water into a pipe and get rid of it. So the first poor solution in hindsight was just to have that pipe go into a river and a water body. Just send it downstream.
For almost a century, towns, cities, and factories in 4 states dumped their sewage into the Connecticut River. sending it downstream to become someone else's problem.
The history of the Connecticut is a lot like the major rivers throughout the country. We had raw sewage running into our rivers. We had industrial waste that was leaving factories completely untreated.
It posed risks for both the people who lived and worked on the river and the animals that depended on its habitats.
When you've got a lot of untreated human waste, untreated industrial chemicals and wastewater entering the water, you're not only going to have an adverse impact on the small critters, the fish, but you also had impacts on the birds and other wildlife that foraged along the rivers or fed on fish.
In 1948, we lost our last bald eagle's nest in the state of Connecticut. And that was a huge problem in the 50s and 60s.
Worse has been man's abuse of the river.
By the middle of the 20th century, the Connecticut River was in such horrible condition that Katharine Hepburn, an Academy Award-winning movie star and Hartford native, was compelled to narrate this film.
It has earned the soiled reputation of being dirty, smelly, and unfit for man, fish, or bird. Being the downstream state, Connecticut inevitably receives the waste of its 3 neighboring states to the north. According to the State Health Commissioner, the river hasn't been fit for swimming for 50 years. Fair, noble, glorious river has now become labeled the world's most beautifully landscaped cesspool.
The river was in bad shape. Raw sewage was dumped into it from all the cities up north. People dumped their garbage into it. It was really a total mess. We water skied here when we were little kids, and you really had to be careful where you fell in because of swirling things that you don't want to talk about.
And the impact swirls downstream. The Connecticut River supplies 70% of the fresh water going into Long Island Sound. So the water quality and ecosystems there are sullied as well. We're not alone in this. By the early 70s, waterways around the country were overrun with sewage. In response, Congress passed the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, commonly known as the Clean Water Act.
If you read the beginning of the Clean Water Act, it has these incredibly ambitious goals, and it says the Clean Water Act's goal is to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of our nation's waters.
To meet those goals, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency established strict standards for wastewater discharges. Goals the MDC is working to meet today, more than 40 years after the law was enacted. And it's not just Hartford. Bridgeport, New Haven, and Norwich all have similar issues with their wastewater systems. In the first half of the 20th century, most people were concerned about making sure Hartford had enough water to supply homes and businesses, to keep people healthy, and industry thriving. But as the population and industrial activity grew, the volume of waste grew. And so the first water pollution control facility was built on the Connecticut River in 1938 by Hartford's MDC. The facility served the region well for more than 30 years. But after the passage of the Clean Water Act in 1972, a facility like this could no longer do the job. Today, we have the modern wastewater treatment plant, a facility so mechanically and technologically intricate, it brings students inside to learn about what goes on in there.
So we have 2 samples, I mentioned them.
If they can stand a few unpleasant smells.
Point to which one is plant water or which one is potable water, meaning it comes out of the sink. You can drink it.
Wastewater treatment plants are environmental marvels. They really are. And they help keep our cities working.
The wastewater that we receive must be cleaned before it goes into the environment. It really is a manufacturing operation. We have thousands of pieces of equipment and all the process controls, automation. and everything comes together to clean water.
Here's how. Homes and businesses in the area connect to 4 wastewater treatment plants through a network of below-ground pipes.
The raw material, the input, is the wastewater that we collect from all the residents, homes, businesses, industry, restaurants. This is what we call our headworks or preliminary treatment. It's the first treatment step at the Hartford plant.
A big part of treating the waste is removing nitrogen to prevent what's called nutrient pollution, one of America's most widespread environmental problems.
The biggest challenge for us is not only to remove the bacteria that we're discharging to the Connecticut River, but also remove the nitrogen.
The nitrogen in the water comes from the users of the water themselves. They are largely in the solids and the liquids from human waste that comes to the wastewater treatment plant. So it's not like someone is putting nitrogen into the water, it's a byproduct of human waste.
Nitrogen is a natural part of our ecosystem, but too much of it in the water can overstimulate the growth of aquatic plants and algae, decreasing the oxygen that fish and other marine life need to survive. Some of these algae blooms can produce toxins harmful to people who come in contact with them, or eat fish from polluted water. Nutrients can also pollute groundwater and endanger drinking water sources.
That nutrient load can cause challenges to the entire ecosystem.
In this process, we treat that sewage through a completely natural treatment process. We don't use any added chemicals. The microorganisms in here, in an activated sludge, the activated means it's biologically active.
What happens in a wastewater treatment plant is essentially the same as what occurs naturally in a lake or stream.
The microorganisms and the activated sludge settles to the bottom of the tank. The microorganisms rest, they get hungry again, and we take a percentage of them back into the treatment process in the aeration tanks.
The wastewater treatment plant revolves around biology and the microbes that are there to help digest the waste and get rid of the nutrients. It's an interesting intersection of both steel and concrete and engineering all around a somewhat fragile and occasionally temperamental biological process that needs to have careful care and feeding in order to work at peak efficiency.
It really, in many ways, is a natural process that we just try and speed up.
How many think this one's water comes out of the tap? All right, hey, good guess. That's the water that comes out of the tap. But virtually, there's not a big difference, right? Would everybody agree that this looks pretty clean?
This single plant treats about 60 million gallons of water a day.
If we took all the water that the Hartford plant treats in a day and we put them in gallon milk jugs, we would line them up side by side, and it would make a line from Hartford to California and back, and a little side trip up to New England.
These are facilities that have to operate 24/7, 365 days a year, and we have to keep them operating.
We always have to treat that water. We can't stop, ask everyone not to flush for a day or two while we take care of a problem. The water always comes in, so it's a constant process.
But those round-the-clock efforts have paid off.
The Connecticut River is cleaner because of the advances in wastewater treatment. Long Island Sound is healthier because of the advances in wastewater treatment.
The Connecticut River is a much improved body of water than it was 30 years ago.
The Connecticut River doesn't smell anymore. The Connecticut River and its tributaries don't run different colors anymore, and they are much healthier than they were 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Marker 48 actually has an osprey nest on it. Ospreys have made a tremendous comeback along the Connecticut River.
As the waters become healthier, wildlife begins to thrive again, and the benefits multiply.
When this river system is carrying less nutrients down to Long Island Sound gets healthier, and Long Island Sound gets to be a more important economic engine and can continue to grow and produce ecological abundance, which produces recreational abundance, which produces economic abundance, which produces a higher quality of life, and people make decisions about where they want to live and work based on amenities. The economic value of Long Island Sound is billions of dollars. There's over 2 million people that live in this watershed, and obviously a lot more people have access to the watershed. So it's tens of millions of people that are interacting with this beautiful river.
I grew up here in Connecticut. I grew up in a town along Long Island Sound, and to see its transformation over the years, to see that it is cleaner in a relatively short period of time has been remarkable.
You're saying a reconnection of people to the water. Events along even the Hartford waterfront that wouldn't have been even thought about 30 years ago. Rowing races, boating, all sorts of things. And I think that's the beauty of it, is you remember that the Connecticut River means so much to so many people, but it also means stuff at a local level.
When communities are investing tens of millions of dollars in riverfront development, that means they're doing it because people are willing to go down and face the river instead of turn away from it. So as our rivers continue to get healthier, we're going to see more economic value from those rivers.
Despite all our new technologies and progress made in cleaning up the Connecticut River, it's still threatened by a common event we can't control. Rainfall. In Hartford, as in many of America's older cities, even a small amount of rain can cause a huge problem. Even today, more than 1 billion gallons of Hartford's untreated wastewater overflow to the Connecticut River annually.
When it rains outside, you have the potential to fill up the stormwater pipe and have it overflow and mix with the sanitary sewage, so it gets mixed together. It now creates a volume of water that's greater than the treatment plant can handle.
I believe over 1/4 of an inch will overwhelm the system and cause overflows of potentially raw sewage or partially treated sewage into our waterways.
And it happens about 50 times each year.
Part of that just comes from the fact that there's more urban area in Connecticut. So when it rains, more of the rainwater comes into the stormwater systems than might have if that land was still agricultural or forested land.
Anytime there's a pending storm, we actually start a 24-hour-a-day operation until the storm has passed and the system has calmed.
Heavy rains will cause our combined sewer systems to overflow, possibly creating backups because it's moving so slow.
What we don't want to do is to have a pump fail, or pump station fail, or system fail, so that it'll back up into other people's houses.
During rain events, customers may experience draining slow. They may have water coming in through a wall that is out of the norm.
The water doesn't get absorbed by the ground anymore and it has to go somewhere.
In Hartford, the threat of rain to our system exists in large part because of a decision made more than 160 years ago. The sewer system built in Hartford in the 1850s uses a single pipe buried beneath the streets. Both sewer water and the runoff from rainwater are collected in this one pipe.
One of the things that was done in Hartford, as was common in many urban areas at the time, was to link together the sanitary sewers that were collecting wastewater from people's houses with the storm sewers from the streets. So when it's dry outside, the flow in that system is just of the sanitary sewers.
But we've heard what happens when it rains. The towns around Hartford have newer systems, so they have two separate pipes, one for sewer water and one for rainwater. But many people send rainwater into the sewer pipes connected to their homes.
It's very expensive to build storm systems. Storm systems in the communities were built to deal with stormwater from the streets, but not from the homes. Residents have no place to put that stormwater. It comes into their basement, they have high groundwater tables, and the only solution is to put a sump pump in their basement and pump it into our system.
You've got the foundation drains, you've got the sump pumps going in people's homes. That's all exacerbating basically the problem in those communities and then in Hartford.
And as the population grows, the problem gets worse for treatment facilities that were built to serve about 30,000 people.
Now they're serving a population of about 400,000 people. So this infrastructure is very old. There's leaks in the pipes, so rainwater can come in and cause there to be more flow in the system.
It's really not just a Hartford problem, it is a regional problem.
When it rains, there's a whole huge flush of water that's entering all these pipes. You've got stormwater and domestic wastewater all coming into that treatment plant when it rains.
If there's a good downburst in the Hartford region, we'll see the flows to the plant increase very quickly. Our average daily flow might be 60 million gallons a day, but during a wet weather period, we could treat in this facility upwards to 130 or 140 million gallons a day of wastewater.
When it rains, it pours, and it pours untreated sewage and untreated rainwater still into our rivers. What do? Do you let that treatment plant get flooded out? No. What you do is you put a release valve in that system. And so when it rains enough and the capacity of all those pipes and all the basins and everything in that treatment plant are reaching capacity, you pull a lever and you have a overflow.
That's called combined sewer overflow.
What you would have is actually raw waste going directly out into the river.
On average, about 1 billion gallons overflows into eventually the Connecticut River.
Those are big deals because when you treat sewage, you're taking out the bacteria. When that goes directly into the stream, that is a massive load into the stream, and that can create huge ecological problems.
Untreated sewage that goes into our rivers can cause local pollution problems. It can cause bacterial growth, beach closures, and that has tremendous impacts on the flora and fauna and the sound, and all the recreation, the commercial activity and whatnot that relies on a healthy Long Island Sound.
You shouldn't have direct contact with the water when those events are happening.
And the problem will probably only get worse.
All of the models of our changing climate indicate that we're more likely to get those heavy rain events. One of our patterns that we've been seeing shifting is that you end up with periods of drought or periods without rain and get all of the rain for the month in a day. And our infrastructure, not only the sewage infrastructure, the stormwater infrastructure, which could be 50, 100, 150 years old, wasn't designed for those sort of intense bursts of water activity.
That's what the Clean Water Project here in Hartford and the MDC is working on, is how do we fix this century-old plus problem of having all of the stormwater and domestic water in one system. Who owns the water? Who owns the fish? And who has legal responsibility for protecting those two things? The answer is the same. You do, I do, the public. Our surface waters are public trust resources. When we were enacting a lot of environmental statutes, there was a very, very important legal concept that was put into these statutes. And that was that citizens have the right to enforce their goals and expectations for their water. That's very important when you think about these issues. An individual citizen doesn't have to knock on the door and ask to come in. They don't have to ask for a seat at the table.
One group has taken a seat at that table, the residents of Wethersfield Cove, an inlet of the Connecticut River just south of the MDC's water treatment facility. The cove is popular for recreation with boat launches and fishing areas, but it also has become a waste bin.
Wethersfield Cove receives a lot of stormwater runoff, and with it, a lot of untreated wastewater and stormwater, but also a lot of trash that gets washed off the streets. When you throw a small piece of trash in Hartford, chances are it's going to end up in Wethersfield Cove.
In 1997, a malfunctioning overflow gate at the treatment facility allowed more than 20 million gallons of raw sewage into the cove.
And so it was a long period of time where citizens were saying, enough is enough. And they went to the EPA, and they went to Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection, and the MDC, and this consent agreement was hashed out, and it was put together as a binding agreement that was driven by the citizens saying, we want more. This isn't good enough anymore.
Whereas the Metropolitan District of Hartford, Connecticut, discharges pollutants into waters of the United States from sanitary sewer overflow outfalls.
The court order came with a large fine.
We paid a $850,000 fine.
A very clear mandate.
Our responsibility under the Clean Water Project is to actually eliminate the overflows.
The U.S. Clean Water Act actually says complete elimination of combined sewer overflows is the goal. The U.S. EPA, the federal government, also recognizes that you can't get there in one step. You're going to get there in an iterative approach over a number of series of improvements over many years.
The court order forces some tough questions.
How do we best get the stormwater out and comply with these regulations and mandates from the state and federal government?
What we do here in Hartford is going to be what is going to be demanded of New Haven, Bridgeport, and all the other cities that are in the same basic condition.
Complying with the order would take time, money, and ingenuity. And it would be huge.
The Clean Water Project is designed to slow, to hold, and to retain those flows so they can be treated before they're ultimately discharged.
There's a lot of utilities underneath the streets, electrical, cable, our own water pipes. So we've got to find a path through all those pipes.
The MDC's initial plan in 2004 was to fully separate the sewer pipe from the water pipe, to ease the burden on the combined system.
What we have realized since is that separation is very expensive.
We had to separate the sewer, put in a new street, then it was new curbs, then it was new sidewalks, then it was lateral connections into the houses, and when we got into the houses, they were talking about plumbing.
And what we realized was it would be more cost-effective to actually collect all of the storm and treat it. So in 2012, we began to work with the state of Connecticut, DEEP, to actually change the concept of full separation and utilizing more storage tunnel capacity to collect those CSOs.
A huge storage tunnel. It's the centerpiece of the Clean Water Project.
We're actually constructing an 18-foot diameter tunnel. We will start it across the street from our Hartford Water Pollution Control Facility, and basically we'll drill a shaft about 200 feet deep, and we will install a tunnel boring machine, and it will drill and bore out this 18-foot diameter tunnel all the way about 4+ miles out to West Hartford. And what will happen is during these rain events that would normally overflow our combined sewer system,
This tunnel will store more than 40 million gallons of wastewater that will eventually get treated at the Hartford Water Pollution Control Facility.
An enormous underground tunnel that can basically be a buffer or a delay mechanism to allow the water to be held there, retained there, and then slowly metered out to the sewage treatment plant to be treated in its normal fashion.
That means the billion gallons that would normally be discharged to the Connecticut River each year will now be significantly reduced.
Some 15 years from now, what we will see is during a typical year, we will not see any discharges to our streams. That is a significant accomplishment.
Other cities have already had success with these tunnels, such as Columbus, Providence, and Chicago.
They've all gone to deep rock tunnels to convey water to the wastewater plant and eventually pump it up for treatment.
One of the things I like is the lack of disruption.
The deep rock tunnel can be drilled underneath, nobody knows what's going on, and it collects the wastewater, gets conveyed to the plant, and so there's much less impact to the public.
And it doesn't preclude options in the future as other changes may need to be made. Because when you look out into the future, 30, 40 years from now, we don't know what technology may be, we don't know what water quality standards and limitations may be, and you want to build a system that's flexible and can adapt to what may happen in the future.
A project this ambitious not only takes money, it takes time.
It would take approximately a year to build the tunnel boring machine. It's a very specialized piece of equipment. It has to be constructed new for each tunnel that's built. Once we start boring the tunnel, it's probably a 3-year process until that project is complete. Maintaining the sewer system is a large task.
We now have 1,500 miles of water pipe. We have 1,300 miles of sewer pipe. We have 4 sewage treatment plants, and all of that has to be maintained.
It's a lot of grit, a lot of wear. It also creates failures within the system, and that's our challenge, is continuous maintenance.
Anytime you're dealing with wastewater, you're concerned with how am I going to keep the wastewater flowing?
MDC Command Center, how can I help you?
Command Center is a 24/7 operation. We receive all the calls from the public agencies, residents, customers, water, sewer related issues.
Is it close to the foundation, being that it's going into the basement?
We get calls about water leaks, about meter leaks, flooding in the basements, sewer backups, the police, because there's cavities or depressions in the road.
We have approximately 500 water and sewer collapses per year.
To an outside observer, the MDC's repair and operations crews can look like an army of specialists.
There's skilled mechanics, licensed electricians, plumbers, carpenters, every part of the craft that you can imagine in order to maintain a facility.
This already complex system has only grown under the Clean Water Project. The project's largest environmental benefit comes from increasing capacity at 2 of the treatment plants.
We've had dramatic expansion in the South Meadows plant. We've spent probably in excess of $400 million just on that plant to upgrade it.
That plant can now treat more flow coming from the sewer systems and also reduce the amount of nitrogen discharged into the Connecticut River, and ultimately Long Island Sound.
We have increased our secondary treatment capacity, so we added some more aeration tanks and clarifiers so that we can remove even more nitrogen from the water.
The plant also improved the wastewater disinfection process with a new ultraviolet disinfection facility.
In years past, we used chemicals that could be dangerous. So to be safer for our environment as well as our employees, we've gone to ultraviolet disinfection. It's light through a series of about 1,700 light bulbs that vary depending on the amount of water and how clean the water is. So we essentially disinfect water with light. Behind us is the waste heat recovery facility. It's not a wastewater treatment process, but an actual power plant.
Another improvement uses excess heat from the process that incinerates solid waste to generate nearly 40% of the Hartford treatment plant's total electricity needs, reducing the carbon footprint and costs.
That heat recovery plant produced over $1 million a year in revenue, which helps mitigate the costs to our customers.
Those kinds of efforts also help keep the MDC's rates among the lowest in Connecticut.
We have a number of towns across the state and across New England that utilize our incineration as a way to get rid of their sludge. So we make approximately $4 million a year in revenue, and that helps mitigate the impacts to this program.
How many more of these today? We're going to move down the road, so we're going to do one more today.
Crews are also inspecting and repairing the aging network of pipes and manholes.
We have cleaning and lining projects, which actually cleans out an existing sewer. Rather than replacing it with a new sewer, they'll insert a liner into that sewer, which is designed to prevent water from coming in from the outside, groundwater from coming into the sewer. We also have projects that will replace manhole frames and covers, which is another source of infiltration getting into the system.
They've just applied a 2-part epoxy spray-on liner to this manhole, which will help seal it up. Manholes can start to develop leaks. You could have potentially thousands of gallons of water running down to our treatment plant, which then would have to be treated even though it's groundwater. So lining this manhole prevents all that inflow from going to our plant.
To handle the combined sewage and stormwater flowing from area towns to the treatment plants, large interceptor pipes are also being installed.
Think of them as highways, getting from one location directly to the treatment plant.
And even though the full separation of the entire system proved too costly in the early stages of the project, there are still strategic areas that require separating the stormwater from the sewage.
It's very easy to build a sewer pipe in the middle of the street. It's very easy to build a water pipe in the middle of the street. But it's very difficult to build that same pipe and try to mitigate the impacts to the community.
We try to construct our projects with minimal impact to the residents, preferably no impact.
The challenge, as you can see, is traffic. We've got to keep people moving around. We've got to keep the residents safe on the sidewalks. People have to get into their homes.
Starting Fairfield on July 7th, the paving. Wow. And then
Community outreach is a huge part of any project that can disrupt local communities.
We had weekly and monthly meetings with the community itself to make sure that we were accommodating and mitigating the impacts to construction.
We're impacting entire neighborhoods, 10 to 15 streets on some of these projects. You can't just go out there and show up on site and start digging. There's a lot of coordination that needs to take place. It requires a lot of front-end work, meeting with key stakeholders, and also devising traffic patterns that are going to work for everyone, allow them access to their businesses, their properties, etc.
There's one lateral in the roadway that needs to be connected.
It also involved opening local offices in each of the affected communities to keep residents informed. Each year, these offices interact with thousands of residents.
Si todo va como tiene que ir, está supuesto terminar en octubre.
We let them know exactly what's happening on their property so we can get them more comfortable with the expectations they might have, find out if there's any issues or concerns going on with the work that's happening at their property. And then at the end, we meet with them to make sure that the contractor and the MDC did what we promised we would do by restoring their property back to the condition that we found it.
That's awesome. The street remains.
Huge infrastructure projects like this don't come cheap. MDC officials needed to raise over $2 billion to fund the project. And we're faced with the daunting prospect of asking voters to pay higher rates.
Big issue is, how do you pay for this? This is an enormous project.
A major source of funding comes from the Connecticut Clean Water Fund.
The MDC's Clean Water Project is a major borrower. It's in fact the largest borrower from the Connecticut Clean Water Fund. Since inception, the state has approved loan and grant commitments to MDC totaling $785 million, and most of that, or a large portion of that, is for the actual Clean Water Project.
The state raised money by issuing special green bonds that attracted investors and kept borrowing costs low.
Our success is really measured by getting the cost of funds down as low as possible. And on the clean water revenue bonds, having the AAA credit ratings is a big help. And out to each of the state agencies would be good. One of the things that makes these bonds attractive to investors are that they are for environmentally friendly purposes. They are green. Even before we started to call them green bonds, they were always for environmentally friendly and responsible projects. And I think that is something that people like.
But most of the money would have to come from the ratepayers through an increase in their water rates.
Our water has traditionally been the cheapest water in the state of Connecticut from the cost standpoint, but it's also the best quality water, probably in the United States.
A special referendum was scheduled for water customers to vote on the rate increase.
The MDC was very focused on our outreach for the referendum approvals.
We had to educate the public on what we were doing and why we were doing it and what the long-term and the short-term cost would be to it.
We started focus groups, which allowed us to understand what the public was thinking.
We went out and talked to the community organizations. We talked to voters.
We executed approximately 200 public meetings to explain the project. In 2006, the MDC had its first referendum in order to get support for the massive clean water program.
Even though the referendum asked voters to approve $800 million in authorizations, it passed with overwhelming support.
We had over 70% validation that it was necessary and needed.
I think the public was convinced, obviously it had to be done. They're under federal mandate to do it. But they also believed that it had to be done for the benefit of the individual people living in this community and its economic future.
There is a tremendous amount of optimism when you talk to people about investing in their rivers. When you tell people you're going to be investing in a cleaner river, a better quality of life, and more economic opportunities from clean water, they agree.
I'm impressed at sort of the size and scale of it. The other part is it's a creative sort of approach to a real sort of challenging problem that we have in cities throughout Connecticut.
Even though construction projects and environmental change can come slowly, there are ways all of us can help keep our waterways clean now. You can install a rain barrel. Rain barrels collect water from rooftops, reducing the amount of water going into storm drains. You can then store that water and use it later. It even has financial benefits, reducing your water bill and electricity to pump that water. Help prevent stormwater from getting into the sanitary system by disconnecting sump pumps and downspouts from the system and redirecting them to your yard or rain barrel. The MDC is working to educate the public on all these issues as part of the Clean Water Project, now underway for almost a decade. A lot of progress has been made, but more needs to be done.
They need approximately 850,000 gallons a day of water.
We have to be vigilant. We're constantly looking at what we can do, what we can eliminate, what we can modify to control the cost of this project.
It's the management and planning of it that's been impressive for me because there's a lot of moving parts. There's treatment, there's storage, there's collection systems, there's pumping systems, backup power. All these elements have to be put together. And then you have to figure out what is the critical path, what has to be built first, so that it's ready to accept the things that are going to come later.
There's an economic impact to what we're doing here, and we have to make sure we're doing it right and doing it as swiftly as possible.
But also the additional minority businesses that the MDC requires.
The challenge is understanding the many, many different requirements that we have to comply with from the state and federal level, but also just putting our project specifications together. There are requirements such as iron and steel requirements, made in America requirements that we have to pass on in our bid packages to make sure that they are followed. For prime contractors, a certain percentage of their dollars that are spent on their contract have to be with small businesses, minority businesses, women-owned businesses. Our supplier diversity program promotes hiring local people throughout the community and getting them on our construction projects as well. We conduct workshops on how to do business with the MDC, how to be a subcontractor, bonding requirements. We marry up the small contractors with our prime contractors who are bidding on our projects.
And through this long, tedious process, the public needs to know what's going on. They have a vested interest financially and in the outcome.
The reason why we have this community outreach office is to be accessible, let the community know that we're open to them. It strengthens relationships with the community and also builds new ones for people that might not have had much interaction with the MDC.
Public outreach is really a key to the success of any sort of large-scale project that has such a long time component to it, because these sorts of projects can be very personal to folks in neighborhoods.
It's one thing to tell somebody when they vote on something that this is going to happen, and then 3 years later they're working in your street. So you need to really be reminded about what it means at all different levels. What does it mean for a community level? What does it mean for an individual neighborhood level? And that requires constant community involvement and public outreach so people are reminded about why we're doing things. And we're doing it on a big scale.
The Clean Water Project won't be completed for another decade, but progress is visible.
Since we've started those nitrogen removal improvements, the district has removed over 1 million pounds a year of nitrogen from our effluent. So that's a lot of fertilizer and potential pollution that we have eliminated from the Connecticut River and Long Island Sound.
Before the Clean Water Project, you would see a lot of streets flood because the catch basins on the side of the road didn't have the capacity to take all that water in. Now the roads are taking the stormwater in more rapidly, getting rid of it more rapidly.
The MDC Clean Water Project's important because of all that it's accomplishing. It's improving the system in the street itself. It's increasing and improving the treatment, both the quantity and quality at the treatment plant, as well as it's dealing with the CSO issue with these combined sewer overflows.
The Clean Water Fund is really an example of a successful partnership between the federal government, who provides a certain amount of the funding, state government, and then local municipalities all working together to provide really good low-cost financing for important environmental projects.
When the Clean Water Project is finally done, the river's going to be cleaner. It's going to be cleaner for people. It's going to be healthier for the critters that live in it. And it's going to be an even more important economic engine for this region.
But while the project will be a significant accomplishment, it's only one in a series of ongoing battles to protect our waterways. The elaborate system of dikes around Hartford used to control flooding from the Connecticut River is almost 90 years old. A dike failure could flood Hartford and cripple the MDC's main wastewater facility.
If that dike gives way, you got a major problem. We've seen what rivers can do and how devastating they can be to life and property. So that's one of the issues that we have with the city, working with the city to make sure that we don't have a catastrophe.
Another challenge is more difficult to tackle and affects communities throughout America.
The next nemesis for this country is going to be stormwater. Stormwater, in some cases, has as much contaminants as sewer might.
Stormwater, running off streets and parking lots, picks up toxic substances like gasoline and benzene.
We have more streets, more parking lots, more buildings. Those are surfaces that are not designed to absorb water, that water just hits them and runs quickly. When it does that, it washes all the stuff that's on the streets into the storm drains, into the sewer drains. And those are additional pollutants that can potentially end up in Long Island Sound.
There's no question that Long Island Sound and the Connecticut River are two of our most valued resources, both worth maintaining and preserving for generations to come.
The Connecticut River affects so many people. It is so important to keep it clean. We've done such a good job in the last 30 years cleaning it up. We need to go that extra step.
We've come a long way, and we take it for granted too many times. People should be vigilant in terms of protecting their environment and the ecology, because not to do it becomes very expensive in the future.
If you can keep it out of the water, then you don't have to spend a lot of time, effort, and money to take it out. So being protective up front is always the least costly and most cost-benefit solution.
What we do isn't just local, but it really does affect the entire water cycle.
We don't plan for 10, 20 years. For water, you plan 50, 100, 200 years. As you look across the country, the whole question of how we deal with water is going to be the predominant issue of the 21st century.
Where there's good water health and cleanliness, we're going to keep it. And where it's not good, we're going to restore it. We're all part of the problem, and we're all part of the solution, and we're all part of the successes. We all live downstream.
Waterworks Part 2, The Water Life Cycle, Cleaning Wastewater for the Future is a community partner content project in partnership with the Clean Water Project and the Metropolitan District.